This podcast is entertainment, not financial, tax, or legal advice. Views expressed represent statements of the speaker in their individual capacity, do not represent the views of Unchained, and should not be considered investment advice. Speakers often have personal, family, or business connections to Unchained, which may include direct financial benefits. Please see our disclosure at unchained.com/podcast.
We are living through a pivotal moment. Lawmakers are drafting the rules that will define what financial freedom means in the digital age, legislation that could shape the rights of Americans for generations to come. The Last Free Americans examines this moment through the lens of Bitcoin self-custody, the intersection of law, technology, and human sovereignty. This series explores the precedents and pressures shaping this new frontier. In the first episode, I spoke with Tim Hite, Director of Policy at Exodus. Previously, Tim was a staff member to Congressman Warren Davidson, who introduced the original Keep Your Coins Act to Congress in 2021. Tim and I spoke about his personal experience working on this draft legislation and the forces it seeks to protect against. Tim is one of the most thoughtful and kind people I've spoken with about these topics, and I'm really grateful that he is the first discussion we're rolling out. Here's our conversation. I really hope you enjoy it.
And yeah, so we're talking because we met in DC earlier this summer, and I had the fortune of getting to meet Representative Davidson, learn that you worked in his office. He was very complimentary of you, as I had shared. So maybe tell me about kind of your journey prior to working for him. How was there a sort of time, person, and just like context fit for you to work on the original Keep Your Coins Act?
Yeah, so I guess going way back, coming out of law school, I wasn't in the industry. I didn't work in crypto. However, I was in school during the 2017 bull run. So that was my exposure. That was the first dive into crypto and seeing all these ICOs come online. And the volatility obviously was crazy there for about 6 to 8 months. And it started as a personal hobby and a personal interest. And then out of law school, I actually worked at FINRA, did things unrelated to crypto. And then an opportunity arose where I had the opportunity to interview with Congressman Davidson. And it was more of a coincidence than anything that he really cared about these issues, and I kind of made a hobby of learning about this over the years. So that was in end of 2020, early 2021. And we just kind of hit it off. And I, like a lot of people in the 2017 bull run, I made paper gains and I lost them. And that was the best learning process you could really ask for at the time. So with that background, it sort of started things off, and we hit the ground running on a lot of these issues.
Was he talking, or were part of those conversations about crypto or about already some of his interests and your
so I guess backing up a little bit, he was interviewing for someone to cover the financial services committee that he was on. And given my background with FINRA and my interest in working in policy and on the Hill, that was primarily why I wanted to go up and work in his office. And it just so happened that crypto was a big issue to him, and crypto was something that I cared a lot about and learned a lot about over the years. So it was a good fit. So I started working for him, and that was after he had introduced the Token Taxonomy Act going back to 2017, which attempted to create the first token classification between securities, commodities, as well as some other things like.
And was that the first crypto-related bill he introduced?
Yeah. So the first bill, that was his first bill, and then Congressman Emmer, now Majority Whip Emmer, also had the Securities Clarity Act, which tried to tackle the same problem. Slightly different way, but those were the first two bills. And then Congressman Emmer also had the Blockchain Regulatory Certainty Act that we hear a lot about today, especially. So I would say
Clarity Act, is that right?
Yeah. It's not word for word what was in the Clarity Act, but the majority of the bill and one of the big goals that bill tried to accomplish, saying that if you're non-custodial service provider, you're not a money transmitter. That did make it into the Clarity Act, and also that language carried over into the Senate discussion draft. So, good news all around, knock on wood. That
Yeah.
there's a lot of strong support there. So we're hoping it stays in.
And so that's another example of, I think, of the type of work you did in that period in Davidson's office. That's like really, it was like the seed of what is being debated now. But just to round out then that like episode, y'all meet. He's in the Financial Services Committee. You're supporting him as a staff member. Crypto is part of it. Where did the inception of the Keep Your Coins Act and the actual like self-custody thread start?
I was trying to think of this the other day. It was, I vividly remember he and I were walking back from, I think it was some hearing or a subcommittee hearing, and it was 2021 or 2022. And they started to talk about, they being other members, started to talk about the threats that um, self-hosted wallets posed to the financial system, or the concerns around it. Maybe threats, they weren't as critical of them then, but they were talking about the concerns. And Congressman Davidson looked and said he wants to protect the ability to self-custody. And at that time, I'm thinking, what do you mean? I can go buy or download a non-custodial wallet. What's the problem here? And he just, he was adamant in saying there is a push, and it's not necessarily a right or a left political agenda item, but there's a push to go after the ability to hold your own digital property in a permissionless environment. I said, okay, I'll write. I worked with a few folks to write the bill, and at the time, it was a good marker, and it brought up a very principled conversation about property rights. I didn't expect it to evolve to where it is today, where it is truly one of the center talking points around digital asset legislation. And I think there's a few factors that contribute to that. I think we've seen other jurisdictions overseas kind of go after the ability to hold and transfer crypto assets through a self-hosted wallet. We've had, going back a few years, we had the unhosted wallet rule that kind of lingered with Treasury, which would have, sort of opened self-hosted wallets up to being KYC'd, or it would have kind of applied the existing rules that we see in traditional finance into this new model, which it's sort of incongruent when you think about it. They're trying to make it an account-based system, is how Representative Davidson will characterize it. And I believe he's right in that characterization. So that's kind of where it started. It started as this foundation, this principled approach to crypto, and a great talking point. And then it has risen in importance over the years. And now we're here. We're talking about it as one of the core principles of any digital asset legislation that moves. Selfishly speaking, it's been kind of cool to see that. I remember when we wrote it, the last thing we did with a lot of bills, the last thing you do is you name the bill.
Yeah.
And so we have this bill that protects self-custody, and I forget the other names I threw out there, but I was proud of a little bit of the play on the KYC stuff, right?
Oh, right.
Little
Yeah.
tongue-in-cheek stuff right there. So, and he liked that, so we ran with it, and it's still around.
It's catchy. Keep your coins. You mentioned how it kind of opened up this frontier, and we were talking about this, that we seem to relitigate or return to a society about property rights. It's like, and I'm struck by even just the setup there at the catalyst. You said it's Davidson is thinking he's seeing this encroachment. He's seeing this other activity that's kind of pushing in on something that to you was just so clearly, obviously already a right, or like already a freedom you have. And so it's kind of, what is there in that moment? It's like the I'm trying to formulate it into a question, but it's
I
kind of,
think you make a good point though. Like in terms of the two different ways we viewed it, I viewed it as an already existing right, which
yes,
yeah, there might be ignorance there,
yeah,
and he viewed it as a right that is vulnerable. Maybe not. Maybe right is not even the right. He just viewed it as a something vulnerable that overzealous regulator could go after.
and that
And yeah, that you point out actually something I never really thought about. I think that's maybe that's a generational thing. Maybe that's I don't know. But at the end of the day, he was right. It needs protected.
and I think, and I got this from Zach Shapiro, who I talked to yesterday, but that he remarked that part of the language that's intentional in the Keep Your Coins Act is something, it's more to the tune of affirming a right that's already there, not creating the right. Not like it's not going so far as to like kind of already create this pre-admittance that like, hey, you might not really be able to do this. It's just sort of like putting up a check.
Yeah, the way it's written in the Clarity Act, it affirms the right as if it is already present. The way it's written in the Keep Your Coins Act, which is a little different, it sort of puts the restrictions on the regulators. So in a way, it insinuates the right existing by saying, "Hey, you can't touch this," whereas Clarity Act says this is a right. Um, I think both get after tackling the same issue and protecting the same thing, but it gives you different ways to think about it. I think we're given the unhosted wallet rule, given the travel rule, and what we've seen overseas. I think a lot of us will look first at, all right, we have to restrict the regulators because that's the easy. I guess that's the
Yeah.
easy out. That's the easy approach. But when you affirm it as an existing right, it makes you think a little bit differently about it. And in terms of legal challenges, you might have to approach it differently. But it does tackle the same thing, I think, both ways.
And so, and we laughed about the constitutional law book. That's your major tome there. We're talking about these some of these historical constitutional issues. Help me from either your own experience or in how that drafting worked. Like where were some of these debates? You know, and I'm also just kind of imagining from a almost a project management perspective, getting to the KYC bill being done. There's conversations with attorneys between you and then all the committee or members. So I'm just kind of curious the structure there of who's really engaged in the drafting and like getting the language right. And then anything also just kind of other like otherwise political or any commentary about like if there were other congressmen, congresswomen that were providing input at that time, kind of just paint some of that picture.
Yeah, trying to think back. I never wrote. I certainly didn't write it by myself. I leaned on, if I recall, the Blockchain Association and Coin Center was very helpful. If I'm thinking back, that was when Jerry Brito was there, so it was Jerry and Peter.
When you
Peter's then talking.
drafted something and then you're sort of sending it around to these some of these partners or
Yeah, yeah. I think so. That's a common way to sort of draft because while staff on the Hill are very knowledgeable and understand the drafting process, a lot of the times, we're human. It's very easy to be kind of set in our own ways and not have fresh eyes when we look at something when we're done with it.
must be all the
And yeah, and even now I look back at some of the things I would have wrote or had written, and I'm thinking, okay, I got a little wordy there. I could have, cleaned that up a little bit. So you always lean on the best out there in terms of understanding the issues. And um, Coin Center has always been a very strong proponent of self-custody. It's evidenced by, their different publications out there. And so that was sort of how it started. I like looking back now, I use the term, or we use the term convertible virtual currency
mm-hmm.
in the original bill, and that was pulled directly from FinCEN guidance going back to 2013. And that's stuff like that you do for consistency purposes.
Yeah.
Like, okay, so Treasury knows what convertible virtual currency is. We'll play on their definitions and use that. Nowadays, do people say that? I don't think so. Maybe some regulators do, but the nomenclature is still evolving. But yeah, that's kind of how the drafting process goes. It's certainly not conducted, by a single individual by any means.
Yeah. What else is there in the creation of that? Like in the way we mentioned something about the more of a right affirmation versus like declaring it's right, or like just kind of about strategically, or just like what areas of legal precedent or otherwise were you paying attention to in the drafting? What was part of that intention?
It was kind of novel in a sense, right? And we were discussing this a little bit before we jumped on. The conversation around property rights has sort of hit this new era where we haven't really had true digital ownership for as long as the internet has really been around, right?
Yeah.
So there wasn't much precedent to lean on other than traditional property rights. So the challenges were, well, it was twofold. It was explaining that and also explaining the concerns around illicit finance. Because that's the knee-jerk reaction from a lot of people. Well, if you have these permissionless transactions, then how do we catch bad actors? Well, it's on a public blockchain. There's plenty of analytics firms out there that can thoroughly dispute that, and they've put out reports. So those were really the two big challenges. It wasn't like I was looking at case law in terms of the property rights. It was more so, this is a whole new conversation. We are in a society that is, I don't want to say accepting, but used to the intermediated financial system, and they may take it for granted. And now you have generations who haven't seen anything else. So it's kind of like, look, mandated intermediated finance is sort of unnatural, right? The most basic form of a transaction is at arm's length between two people, not between me, you, both of our banks, whatever app we want to use. And, I'm not speaking ill of any of those intermediaries, but it's just gotten to the point where I think people are waking up to it. Maybe I'm naive again, but that conversation is continuing to evolve, and it's only getting louder.
Yeah. I love that you used the word unnatural there, because I think when that comes to these constitutional law issues, and then putting ourselves in the shoes of framers, and then every judge that's had issue thinks about that a lot of the language refers to these natural rights, inalienable rights, or just that that characterization of like what is like the frontier of the consistently net good kind of a thing for what we want for this country to be.
And that's why you see the CBDC conversation becoming what it is now, right? I think Americans are waking up to that. And there's protect self-custody, and then there's CBDC and programmable money.
Yeah.
And those are two opposite ends of the spectrum there. And if you protect self-custody, then you protect against all the bad that a CBDC can bring, because at the end of the day, people can protect their own property. They can transact how they want with who they want. And again, it's on a public blockchain. It's traceable. So, you have both those going on simultaneously, and maybe I should have brought that up sooner, but they've both gotten louder together at the same time. And I believe it's because they're related. And we saw that play out in the debate on the Clarity Act on the House floor. Obviously, there's a lot of members concerned about the Fed's authority to issue a CBDC, whether it's retail or wholesale. And they're pointing at China as the great example, which rightfully so. I think it's kind of dystopian to think about, but yeah, I don't expect those to go away anytime soon. And I hope they don't. They shouldn't.
So it's interesting. Yeah, you point out these kind of counter forces almost, or just that the interest or attention for self-custody, the interest and attention for CBDCs is kind of co-evolving. It does seem like there's a clear lead by at least self-custody and its popularity probably versus like the anti-popularity of CBDCs at least appears to be kind of loud enough. It might be even louder than the pro self-custody idea.
I think that's because it's very easy to grasp, like right away at a very high level, the concept of a central bank digital currency. You can explain it a lot more because when you go into self custody, then you're opening, a lot more that you have to sort of talk people through if they're not familiar with blockchain technology and the assets. So, yeah, CBDC is a great entryway into, okay, this CBDC is bad. This is why self custody is important. So the conversations naturally complement one another.
And so as I like this too, is I'm kind of trying to draw the pattern of even that moment where Davidson's reacting to the encroachment of this idea that this is a threat to illicit finance. I'm curious for sort of just like what gives that lobby power at the end of the day. And there's kind of acute things like a 9/11 happens and then BSA suddenly becomes, like Patriot Act, like that, or like that. Sometimes those kind of acute global or national events will force something through. But what feeds the fire? What feeds the like give me more transactions to modern idea?
I think it's an easy argument to make, personally, because it goes back to the top. It's a natural right. It is easy to say it is natural for someone to hold their property without reliance, without the need for permission from an intermediary. So I believe that feeds into it a lot. And social media also plays a role in that. I think the ability to pass things is greatly affected by how quickly they spread on social media. And I was saying this the other day, right? That if you look at the Patriot Act, if you look at the Bank Secrecy Act, if those bills were brought in a social media age, I think I think the analysis, I think the provisions in there would have spread so fast amongst the public that there would have been a massive movement to oppose those bills. That's my theory. I could be very off, but we see it now. We can see 1,000-page bill, and then you'll see someone tweet out one provision, and all of a sudden that dominates the narrative. And sometimes it dominates it to the point where it will affect the prospect of that bill passing. So we're fortunate in that we can communicate widely and rapidly and mobilize in this day and age. And I think that really helps with these arguments, these easier arguments to make, like self-custody
But
and the idea of property rights.
all this happening in daylight versus it sounds like is when this when this idea of like further surveillance or further strengthening and then like blocking or impinging on self-custody rights, that activity happens most successfully in the dark. And then like who is it sort of just a characterization? Is it the people who run the FinCENs and have those kind? I mean, I'm an American. I trust usually most other Americans are doing the best they can or under their circumstances or their incentives. So, but I do feel like the guidance and things that they publish there's been a lot of reasonable stuff. It's clear that there's a dialogue. But I guess what is it that really though leans people hard into like being career, like, give me I'm trying to understand the psychology, just like
Me too.
yeah,
I don't want to overgeneralize and categorize everyone at one regulator as
yeah,
being this deep state operative or anything like that, because there has been some reasonable stuff, and I think most notably is the FinCEN guidance on the non-custodial service providers, right? That it came out in 2019, and the for all the enforcement actions and all the negativity that was directed at the Biden administration for how they approach digital assets in the industry, that guidance withstood all of that. So there is a bipartisan agreement on some of these principles. So where it comes from, I think, yeah, I'm sure there's a mixture of opinions within these agencies as well. Um, I always think when Michael Mosier was acting director of FinCEN, and a lot of people know who Michael is in the industry, and he's a great champion of individual liberties and the ability of self custody. So yeah, I'm still trying to figure out where the pain points are, which individuals. I think there's some folks that don't want to give up authority if they have the authority to get all these financial reports submitted to them and sift through them. They don't want to create an end around for that. They don't want to lessen their ability to do that. And I think it's always going to be a battle.
yeah.
I always said it. I always said if we get self custody protections, the best self custody protections you can think of in legislation, there will always be a battle to protect that, because there will always be people out there that view it as a vulnerability, a national security vulnerability. And I think it's going to be important to always defend that right.
Yeah.
But
Please go ahead.
one other way I like to think of it is the argument against the ability of self custody. You take all these individual instances of illicit finance and multiply it by the magnitude of their impact, and you have a negative outcome, right? Like surely there's illicit finance that's conducted, there's reports, it's small, but we can acknowledge it's there. And people will look at the outcome from that and say, therefore, we need the government to be able to monitor and control this ability. But those same people who are arguing that don't necessarily recognize, okay, what if the worst person you can imagine becomes or obtains that ability to control that authority and use it for whatever purposes they want, like go after certain groups or certain transactions. Like I think the magnitude of that is disproportionately higher than individual instances where there's illicit finance. We've kind of seen that with the Operation Choke Point 1 and 2, right? And I think there's recognition on both sides of the aisle that that's a bad thing, and that either side could weaponize that if they want. And now we're seeing movements, especially this week, we saw the executive order. We're seeing movements to curtail that. And hopefully that sticks in people's minds. Unfortunately, people move on pretty quickly and tend to forget sometimes, but it's been around for the last decade, and it only fuels our argument that you want to give individuals the ability to control their property and not give the authority to government actors to discriminate against certain types of transactions. I hope I explained that okay. But yeah, the choke point stuff also complements our conversation around self custody as well.
What?
Canadian trucker.
Yeah.
Oh, I was just going to say the Canadian truckers really showed that, not the U.S., but I think everyone's very familiar with the negative implications that
Those are
that
big
situation.
Unchained. The months where the trucker protests were happening, the bank failures of early 2023, BlockFi stuff, like that was a big season for us. I'm sure probably even at Exodus too.
Yeah, that was before I was here, but yeah.
Okay, and then one thing you brought up was the unhosted wallet rule that sounded like kind of a proposal since things like the Keep Your Coins Act was drafted.
Yeah.
When was that? When was this unhosted wallet rule? What was that?
That was a proposed midnight rulemaking in December 2020. And that sort of looked at the on and off ramps, being the financial institutions that are subject to the Bank Secrecy Act and how they interact with unhosted wallets.
That was
And
a thing. Is that right? That was like when that was Munchin
what's that?
wasn't Munchin the
Yeah,
treasury guy?
yeah, Mnuchin. Yeah.
Munchin, yes.
Mnuchin. Yeah. And that was a great example of why a bill like the Keep Your Coins Act was necessary. We're seeing more and more examples, not necessarily here, but elsewhere. I think it was Turkey that implemented some rules on if you're going to transfer to a self-hosted wallet, there's like a 72-hour waiting period or 48-hour waiting period on top of monthly thresholds that you can only transfer up to a certain amount. And it's sort of like you look at that, and that provides the best argument here in the US as to why it's important. And if the US can't protect it, it's gonna set itself ahead instantly. And so we become much more attractive for developers, for people who wish to control their own finances without the reliance on intermediaries.
Do you think that will be good for the average American? If
Oh
there's
yeah,
more access, more of that capability?
absolutely. I think Americans are going to benefit from the Genius Act as we see stablecoins come online, and eventually we'll see transaction costs coming down, and they'll benefit from these developers coming onshore and creating these applications that take out the reliance on an intermediary. And this may take a long time, but fingers crossed. I like the prospects.
You shared how Representative Davidson, in his view, what we have is an account-based system. Was the words you used? I've heard him use that before. Tell me more about that, or because I do find it's interesting to try to come up with ways that you can describe to people, like other fish. What is the water we're swimming in? How do we kind of create that that recognition?
Yeah. The best example that I always use is going back to traditional securities and looking at GameStop. And when GameStop experienced that short squeeze, you had more shares shorted than the float that was out there. And the average person started to ask, how is that possible? Because I have an account at my broker. Well, yeah, you have an account. That doesn't grant you ownership, right? Yeah, you're the beneficial owner, but you don't actually possess the shares. They can be lent out. It's just like fractional reserve banking as well. That's why we need FDIC insurance. And the concept of ownership is going back to what we were saying. We're kind of hitting this stage of the conversation on property rights where people are rethinking what is ownership. And if you control the private keys, you control where your crypto is, and you control who has access, or well, you keep access to it. And that is a very easy concept to grasp, rather than, oh, I have an account, and then what does that mean? Then there's a longer conversation there. So, and because you have an account that is held by an intermediary, that intermediary is regulated. and it's sort of a de facto arm of the government in some ways whenever they have to file these reports frequently. So that's when we say account-based system, that's what we're saying. You're kind of at the will of an intermediary.
Yeah. What, just if we unpack that even a little further, what is going on that, because I could see several things. I could see like what is going on that reinforces an account-based system, and then I'm trying to think about what happens when we don't have one, or say, if 99% of our financial services is a account-based system, what about in 10 years where maybe only 20 or 30% of it is? What's happened? It's like, Wall Street shrunk, as like just sort of what does that look like?
Answering the second question first, I don't think we would ever get rid of an account-based system to a degree, because I think if you were to protect the ability to hold your own assets, that also creates incentives on the other side from the intermediary standpoint, right? If I deposit cash into my checking account, how much am I getting on interest? Barely anything. Well, there could be an incentive there if all of a sudden there's other options to go away from an intermediary. Because I'm not going to say there's no benefit to entrusting a third party, right? Not all of us are going to put the cash under the mattress. And I think consumers would benefit both ways. One, you have the ability to control. Two, you're seeing more beneficial terms at the intermediaries. So yeah, I'm not going to try to say, oh, this is going to upend everything. Wall Street's never going to exist.
Yeah.
I think it will just overall benefit the consumer because it'll create the right incentives.
Well, if I think about it, there's the land of, you need intermediaries to provide reporting to governments or IRS or things. You might need them to provide attestation or services to descendants or other people around the assets. But I'm struck by how because there's intermediation, it creates the incentives to business models that then create maybe risk, or have a kind of like a yield harvesting, or like something kind of happening that they're doing with other people's money.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess that's part of what I'm curious about on the spectrum of a lot of these things. What net good that all brings, or because it's probably not non-zero, or like we like investments, or like there's some risk reward calculus for a lot of different things. But I'm finding it interesting just that how much of the financial services world works on mining other people's money.
Yeah, I mean, the earnings speak for themselves, right?
Yeah.
And going back to your one question on sort of what's enriching this account-based system over the years, I think uh, a big aspect of that goes back to the Bank Secrecy Act, and you had the $10,000 reporting threshold way back when, not indexed, not adjusted for inflation, and over the last 50 years, as the dollar has decreased in value, not to open up, a whole nother conversation, but as the dollar has decreased, intermediaries have sort of grown into that, or the reports have grown into that number. So now the $10,000 has stayed the same. The number of reports that are filed, it's exponentially higher. I'm not sure the exact numbers. I remember reading it not too long ago, but there's no way you can expect FinCEN to effectively even combat money laundering whenever they're inundated with that many reports. So even for those who argue, oh, the Bank Secrecy Act is a good thing, it's still not necessarily efficient right now,
Yeah.
given what the infrastructure was when it passed versus now how big the financial system is and the value of the dollar.
And how have there been proposals to
Oh
increase
yeah,
$1,000, but it's just a heist or it just never goes anywhere?
yeah. I mean, it kind of goes back to, I think some folks are reluctant to give up uh, regulatory authority
Sure.
or their. So yeah, I
And that
there's always proposals.
processes things and reduce their budget. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um, what risks?
we'll see though. There's always ongoing conversations about that, and I think it's maybe coming to a head.
Hmm.
Um, because there's plenty that's being written now on how, for instance, I saw a statistic. It was Nicholas Anthony over at Cato. He looked up how many reports are filed with FinCEN that are just under the $10,000 threshold. So it's like they're filing a report because it's close to being suspicious and close to being above that threshold. So it's like, where do you draw the line?
Adding extra noise.
Yeah, I know. It's kind of crazy.
What risks do you see to the self custody provisions in the Clarity Act? What risks do you see that passing before end of year?
Risks as in the bill changing.
That could be a risk. Just not passing. Clarity
Yeah.
Act all not passing, or just kind of what risk do you see?
So where things stand right now, we saw the Clarity Act pass the House, and that was a monumental moment given how big the vote was. It was even better than the Fit 21 bill, and the self custody language was better than Fit 21 as well. So we saw it pass the House, and it went over to the Senate, and now we're sitting in a position where the Senate has rolled out, or the Senate Banking Committee has rolled out its version or draft version of their market structure bill. So that tells part of the story because there's still going to be a CFTC component. I don't think anyone is really disputing that. The CFTC is going to play an important role here. So we're waiting to see the CFTC component, and then we're waiting to see how those bills are going to be reconciled. So there's a long way to go. Um, then again, sometimes things develop much faster than you can anticipate. Seeing 3 crypto bills pass the House in 1 week was massive, and the industry is definitely vocal, and I think the Senate is very aware of the need for regulatory clarity in the secondary market and the drawing the line with digital commodities and digital securities or tokenized securities. So when they come back in September, when the Senate and the House come back in September, there's going to be a lot on their plate. But I think this is going to remain at the forefront of their minds. We saw the press conference with Senator Scott and Senator Lummis and Bo Hines, where they said September they wanted to see market structure uh, pass. So I'm sure there's a lot of pressure. People don't forget that. So I'm optimistic.
Cool. So you said there's a lot of work to do, but does that affect you think still that it would pass in before end of year?
I would hope. When I say I'm optimistic, September would be shockingly fast. End of year could be more realistic. So you have the funding, the fiscal funding that is usually a September fight, going up to the end of the fiscal year, and sometimes that's just extended it into December. We'll see how that plays out. I'm certainly not an expert on that. And then at the end of the year, you have some must-pass legislation with the NDAA, the Defense Authorization. Sometimes you see things included in there, sometimes you don't, in terms of other proposals and other policies. But the end of the year is usually busy, and I'm sure this isn't going to be tossed by the wayside, and we're not going to hear about it. Um, I think it's important to follow up on the momentum behind Genius and the momentum behind a strong House vote on clarity, and take that momentum and use it to your advantage.
Yeah. Cool. So I didn't hear any otherwise like specific risks or things that you think, just really affect the balance of potential outcomes for both like the self custody language and the Clarity Act.
Yeah, I mean there may always be an argument, or there is always going to be concerns around the illicit finance, but I think there are conversations that can be had to mitigate those concerns, in terms of just explaining the ability to use the technology to your advantage to combat illicit finance rather than looking at it as a vulnerability. If someone is going to look to avoid any type of surveillance, I think cash is still going to be king.
Yeah.
So, as long as that's out there, it sort of makes the illicit finance in crypto look very minuscule.
Yeah.
And there's reports to even show that. We've seen FinCEN and Treasury put out reports that confirm as much.
And then what do you think is next? Say, we get the outcome we'd like. We have the language that's the same or substantially similar to what's already in Clarity Act. Gets passed before end of year. What's the battle of 2026 look like, especially around anything neighboring to self-custody, maybe the non-custodial developers? Assume that stuff passes too, but just back to the idea of the debates that echo through the halls of history and this new frontier of property rights. With this victory in hand, then what does that forever war look like?
Besides the fact that there may always be outspoken critics of self-custody that may always want to disrupt that ability, I think there's going to be issues surrounding maybe the security space and how to allow for the self-custody of tokenized securities. We're hearing a lot about that now. Those are a little more nuanced in terms of, if you're going to buy a security, you're going to go through a regulated broker dealer. If we live in a world where someone can possess their own tokenized securities, what does that off ramp look like? Because it may look a little different than a commodity like Bitcoin. So I anticipate there's going to continue to be very nuanced discussions in rulemaking processes that we'll see with respect to this quote on-chain movement or tokenization movement. There's a lot of other issues that have to be tackled probably before that, but I don't think the conversation is going to go away. I think it might just be starting up now if people get the taste of what it's like to control their own digital property, and then they look elsewhere at other forms of property or financial instruments for that matter.
Does it improve things for those ecosystems? I find myself asking if, what is the net good of holding your own stock certificates or like a bearer version of your stock certificate? And there's a whole panoply, a whole zoo of potential securities. Just, I'm going back and forth between that and Bitcoin, quad Bitcoin, and then I acknowledge things like our IRA product involve someone holding their own keys. We're not intermediary, but we are a reporting function for IRS, like in and out, that type thing. So it's that interesting kind of blend of it's an IRA account and you have some account based part of it, but the custody is separate. So I'm wondering if are we going to see that for other things?
I think that captures a lot of the arrangements we'll see. In terms of what the benefit of holding your own, looking back to a lot of these questions that are being posed, how do we regulate custody at the intermediaries like broker-dealers or RIAs, for instance? The SEC is posing these questions. The Senate's posing these questions too with their discussion draft. First and foremost, when there's self-custody of assets, I think it mitigates a lot of the problem that we're trying to face, right? Which is counterparty risk. And, I'm not going around saying everyone's risky. You can't trust anyone who acts as a custodian. I'm just saying if there is a third party, there is inherently a vulnerability or some type of risk associated with it, whether we like it or not. So you can significantly decrease that problem or the scope of that problem if you give people the ability to self custody. And I mean, I would actually be interested to hear kind of your arrangement and how you think of that when you give people their own keys. I think that's going to set the stage, and we're going to see a lot more of that. So you know, you're probably ahead of the game there.
Well, it's an interesting. I find it. I feel like there's a question that I asked Zach. You know, there's an obvious answer to it, but it's nice to have on camera. But it's like, would Bitcoin be as valuable as it is? Would it be this 2 trillion, plus dollar asset if it didn't have self custody? And I might say no.
That's actually a good question.
Probably not.
If you make it as far as reading the abstract in the white paper, it seems like that's sort of the entire point. I mean, there's also, you know, great arguments to make on it's fixed at 21 million. It's
Right.
not susceptible to
Peer to peer. It's like that. It comes back to, I think that we haven't used that language, but it's something about the peer to peer has this like kind of inherent property of self custody as one of the peers. You have sole disposition for it. So then a question for me is a formulaic, like now, if some other asset is self custodyable, does that make it, or is there peer to peering, kind of it? Because that would be one argument, say, for like even our IRA product is IRA is not quite the peer to peer, type of thing until the government is like a peer that we pay taxes to on the blockchain. I don't know that. Yeah, maybe that would be.
I've thought of that. If you have a whitelisting process in place or some type of gatekeeper that says, okay, this wallet is now eligible for receiving and custodying these assets, is that truly peer-to-peer? I mean, after you go through that, you have true control, but to go through that, there's an intervention with a third party. I guess you could say it could be peer-to-peer if I could send you assets. We're both whitelisted, but in me sending you assets, there's no third party involved.
Yeah.
But the third party was involved before the fact, right? So we would have never got to that point if there wasn't some sort of onboarding or whitelisting. So I don't know, peer-to-peer with an asterisk.
Yeah. Yeah. So
it's unfortunate. I think the peer-to-peer phrasing has also gotten a little bit conflated.
Oh, interesting.
I think, and it goes back to this idea that people don't recognize the degree of the account-based system. Like if I'm going to use I'm not going to name any apps, but if I'm going to use an app to send you money, like one of these traditional apps, how many parties are involved in that? I mean, it's not just two of us.
Yeah. Yeah. It may look on the surface like a peer-to-peer experience, but it's absolutely not underneath.
Yeah. So that when I say peer-to-peer has been conflated, that's what I mean whenever I hear someone say, "Oh, sending you this money, it's a peer-to-peer transaction." It's like, well, there's a lot of folks involved. I wouldn't necessarily use the term peer-to-peer.
Totally. Yeah. This is fun. I've had fun talking about this stuff. What else is there? What we think are good points to make about this overall topic?
I think the momentum's on the right side. I would have never thought 3 years ago that self-custody would be the hot topic, and now it's getting right up there, and that's a good thing. So, keep it up, keep the conversations going. I'm glad to see you're sort of lifting this project off the ground and running with it and getting people aware. And I think that will only serve to benefit not just the industry, but the country.
Yeah, that's right. It's so cool. It's like, what a cool principle. I had a guy in the office today tease me. You heard I was stepping in front of him. He said, "Hey Joe, give me self-custody or give me death." You know, all right, Jonathan, you've been thinking about this, okay? Good.
I mean, at the end of the day, I think people will find if they don't trust the system. It's almost like the Jurassic Park phrase: "They'll find a way." Nature finds a way. People will find a way. If they don't want to use intermediaries, they'll use cash until cash is outlawed. I don't know, not to sound too cynical, but then you turn to something else.
And back to nature. Nature finds a way. I love that.
Yeah.
Cool,
It
Tim.
was great.
It's a lot of fun, man.
Yeah, likewise.